Good afternoon and welcome to this Foundry Healthcare webinar this afternoon on the subject of marketing to the NHS and specifically talking about integrated multi-channel communications. Why are we spending time and effort talking about this topic? Well, as I'm sure everybody's aware that, it's something that we all have to do. Increasingly, marketing budgets are being moved onto digital channels away from traditional channels within healthcare. Around about that, in general, we've also seen some meta trends going through. For example, in August of this year, for the first time, more searches were being made on mobile and tablet than on desktop. So we're seeing this revolution in terms of the type of devices that people are using for accessing material on the internet. In terms of social media, healthcare has traditionally been fairly slow on the uptake in terms of social media compared with more FMCG type of organisations. But in fact, that indeed is changing. 50% of healthcare companies have now got a social media budget. And in fact, 70% of those companies are actually increasing their social media spend, which of course is indicative of the fact that it's doing something for them. It's actually making that meaningful for them. Why else? Well, of course, the integration of healthcare and digital devices is something that we see all around us from a consumer perspective. The new iPhone 6 is coming preloaded with Google's new healthcare app. And I'm sure you're aware of the phenomenon of the quantified self, whereby consumers are just taking on board and interacting with healthcare apps on their phones on a daily basis, and something which is exponentially increasing month by month. Again, when we think about our healthcare professional audience and people that we're trying to talk to within the NHS and beyond, of course, they're people like us. Of course, they're going to be using social media, and things like We Nurses, a forum that has been active on Twitter, has actually got over 25,000 members, and these are active members. I think one of the key things about We Nurses, which is remarkable, is the fact that people are interacting on this. Regular forums where we've got panels of nurses talking to each other about key issues. Evening by evening, people are very, very engaged, not just listening, but actually getting involved and being active and talking about things on a professional level. So it isn't just social media thinking about social, it is social media that has got a reality in the professional world. So what does it mean for us as marketeers? Well, this is something that I'm sure we're all aware of, in that we're moving away from the cosy old days of tradition where it used to be very easy for us, didn't it, where it was very much about our brand was in control, that we were out there broadcasting a message, we controlled what it was, we could focus in on the brand, we were all about getting our information out, persuading and creating content that could really fit in with our story. Well, of course, now the audience is much more in control, and it's about a two-way conversation that we need to be involved in. And part and parcel of that is all about us having to adapt our message. It isn't a case of one size fits all, and once we've agreed on the wording, we can all sit back and wait for the next project. Everything has to be very, very dynamic and move on a regular basis. So the world is changing massively. We can't just get out our message. We have to involve, we have to educate, we have to influence our audience, we have to talk to them on a one-to-one basis. And clearly the content that used to be just our own remit with the advent of social media is that content has been created by your audience, and it's much more for we as brand owners is thinking about how do we harness that, how do we use that created content, how do we co-create with our audience. So lots more challenges for us as marketeers. And we can start to think about integrated strategies. So we can ask ourselves, what does an integrated strategy look like? And this, of course, is massively oversimplified, but, a nice way of doing things was we always started with our brand proposition. We then filtered that down through to our HCP audience, our patient audience, and then we were able to disseminate that across the multi-channels that we had in our marketing mix. And this way of doing things, absolutely right, it creates a coherent brand message, it creates something that we're able to target through to the individual audiences, and that's fine. But in a multi-channel world, when we're thinking about integration, actually an integrated strategy starts to look much more like this. So it's thinking less about the ways in which our message is disseminated down the flowchart, but it's more a way of how are these individual elements interconnected, how do they talk to each other, how do they interrelate. So for example, we can start to think about our patients and thinking about how we contextualize our message in terms of the way in which they interact with the healthcare professionals in charge of their care, and vice versa. We can think about our social activity. How does that actually direct HCPs through to more involved content on the web? What can we do in terms of driving attendance at events and involvement in events from our website? And equally, how can we utilize attention that we're getting on a very, very involved and personal level at events to actually get people involved and coming back and returning to our website on a regular basis? It all starts to be about the ways in which these things interrelate, because a true integrated multi-channel strategy is not just about creating content for these silos, it's about the way in which all of these silos interact to create a truly harmonious campaign. So where do we start in terms of thinking about the way in which these campaigns can be formulated? Well, really it's all about thinking about the right person, the right message, the right time that we're engaging, and crucially the right device more and more. So let's take each of these in turn. Thinking about the right person, it used to be, again in the good old days when I started my career in healthcare marketing, the brand was king. We thought about our brand and we thought about how that brand can start to interact with our audience, be they nurses, be they GPs, be they pharmacists, be they patients, procurement audiences, carers. But it was all very much about what's our brand message and how do we disseminate that out there. Well, of course, one of the key things and the biggest changes that the NHS has had to focus on over recent years is the fact that patient is at the centre more and more. We cannot think of ourselves in terms of a service, just as the NHS can't think of itself as in terms of a service with itself at the centre as its own sort of little ecosystem. Everything has got to be patient-centric. It's where it all begins and ends. So for us as brand marketeers, we have to, look through a different end of the telescope and start to think about how we can think about our messages from the perspective of the patient being at the centre, and thinking about the relationships that the patient has with all of the other elements, all of the other segment audiences that we need to try and connect with. So we've seen, we all know a strong brand proposition delivers coherence across all of the communications. And we know that delivery, when we start to think about how we tailor that to our individual audience segments in terms of, what sort of language we're using, what tone of voice, what context, what knowledge levels, it all sounds like page one of the manual, although I have to tell you in a recent meeting that I had, somebody was proudly showing me their new patient website, which was absolutely written in pure fluent NHS. The jargon was incredible. So it's easy to miss some of these really, really obvious pinpoints. So we've got to think about that delivery, that tailoring it to an individual audience segment. But when we're thinking about integration, it's not just about tailoring that message, it's about contextualizing and recognizing the relationships. Again, at a recent series of focus groups that we did with nurses, this quote typified some of the attitudes that we were coming across. I would never give out a drug company's information because I always feel it's going to sell their product. The nurses that we spoke to were very protective of their patients and very protective of their patient relationships. And, as far as they were concerned, they were the ones in charge of that relationship, in charge of that patient care. And if information was coming out from an organisation, a pharmaceutical company, a drug company, med devices company or whatever, that was going against what they felt and they felt was just out there to make money essentially, they were always going to feel uncomfortable about it. So, we need to recognise that this attitude is there and actually utilise it to our advantage. One of the clients that we have here at Foundry Healthcare is an organisation called Salts, who's in the business of ostomy care. Again, a hugely emotive issue for patients. And what we wanted to try and build was a site which actually gave really, really in-depth advice to both patients and also ostomy HCPs to help people through the journey of coming to terms with having ileostomy, colostomy, and how they deal with it. what we needed, because the relationship with the medical profession was so involved for these patients, what we actually did was we wrote the entire thing with the support and active involvement of some ostomy nurses. So that way, what we could be sure of is that we are singing from the same hymn sheet as the nurses that are involved in these patients' treatments. And that relationship was actually taken further and further with the introduction of afternoons where we got together ostomy patients with salts as part of a sort of salts afternoon where they could get together with HCPs, they could ask for information, they could share their own experiences, or they could just relax and have a cup of tea with like-minded individuals. So that relationship between healthcare professional and patient is something that was at the heart of the development of the website and then really expanded out into the heart of the SALTS marketing programme. What about the right message? Well, as always, content is critical. And the way in which we think about content is having to change in the context of this multi-channel world that we're in. It's no longer effective for us to shout about our own product and to shout all about our product benefits. More and more what we need to be thinking about is how can we educate, how can we give advice, how can we give support to our audience, whether that's a HCP audience or a patient's audience. We've got to give value over and above the initial, here's some information which is all about us. It's got to be about sharing and not shouting. The second key issue to think about in terms of content now is that we've got to keep moving. It's got to be dynamic. If you're wanting to create a relationship, and as brands, that is the holy grail for us, is having an ongoing relationship with our audience, then it's no good simply to sort of provide a website, simply to provide some content online, which never changes. Because what incentive are we giving people to come back and keep interacting with each other, with us, if it's purely going to be the same information every time they come through? We've got to be giving them something new. We've got to be giving them something which is changing, which is relevant, which is new news for them, which of course is an enormous ask for us as marketeers. But if we don't do it, we are going to have to be left behind. The other thing that we really need to come to terms with is grasping the social media mecca. Again, traditionally, because of regulatory issues, because of the need to really sort of control our message, which has been part and parcel of the healthcare industry for years and years and years, we have companies have been suspicious of social media and nervous about getting involved for many, many good reasons. However, it's out there. Conversations are taking place. The HCPs that are part of your audience are talking on social media and using it in a professional capacity. Patients that are taking your drugs, that are using your devices, are on social media and exchanging their thoughts and experiences. So with social media, the key thing I think is that you've got to start somewhere. You've got to start by listening. And if you do nothing else, even if you don't get to that point for a long time of actually getting involved and jumping in with both feet, it is invaluable to be able to have some tools, or to work with your agency to have some tools that start to really listen to what's going on, listen to the conversations that are relevant to your brand online, because that's where you're going to sort of get some real insights into the environment, the market in which you're moving, what your audience is thinking and feeling. And then once you're ready to move on to the next stages, it's crucial to have a social media strategy and a plan to work with. So, what happens if somebody has a moan about your product? What happens if somebody is delirious with delight because of something that's happened to do with your brand? What's your reaction? What's your response? How do mediation respond to this? What happens, between 5:30 on Friday and 9 o'clock on a Monday morning? Social media is 24/7. It operates on a different level of parameters. What's our policy? And just to reiterate, we spoke about we nurses. These conversations are going on, and the thing is as well is that they're going on in a certain context. We can't use social media just to jump in and promote our product. It is a way of engaging with our audience, but it has to be done subtly. You're not going out there. It's not a sales channel. It's a way of engaging with our audience. So that's another crucial thing to realise about social media. So The right person, the right message, the right time. What do we mean by this? Well, we can start to think about this from a number of different angles. We can think of time in terms of the time in which you are engaging with the patient during their lifetime. It could well be if we've got a patient with a chronic condition. And thinking about that patient journey in this instance, we can start to see that, you know, actually there are some very, very different changing communications needs for a patient as they go from almost that acute stage when, you know, perhaps they're being first diagnosed with diabetes, or the child's been first diagnosed with eczema. You know, it's an area of sort of high anxiety. You feel very vulnerable. You know, there's almost sort of a level of panic that's there in that phase. There's then a sense where you become very, very information hungry, pardon me, and you're in that transition phase of sort of really, really finding out as much as you can about your condition, about your treatment. You're still feeling fairly vulnerable. You know, there potentially may well be things that you need to change about your behaviour and your regimes and so on. So, you know, a lot of stuff to be absorbed at that stage. And then we go on to a third phase, which is typically about sort of 2-3 months after diagnosis, when, you know, actually it starts to become commonplace. The patient starts to get a little bit more relaxed, and this is where compliance issues start to kick in. You get potential complacency, and there's a little bit of a sense of how do you handhold that patient through sort of a continuing relationship with your brand. Well, what this means for us as brand owners is that there are opportunities here for increasing levels of brand engagement and for ways in which we can start to target those messages in recognition of the different stages that the audience is going through. So that may well be, you know, an understanding that in those first stages, what you don't do is bombard somebody with masses and masses of detailed information. They're probably not ready for that at this stage. Rather, it's more, you know, more useful to perhaps give some directional information to patient, to family, to carers maybe, and to be very reassuring in tone, and increasing the level of education as we go through to, you know, maybe it becomes, as people become more relaxed at that home phase, it becomes about support groups, it becomes about forums, it becomes about latest news in terms of treatment, it may be about sort of new and different ideas to support compliance. But we can see that those needs change, and we can start to think about our timing of our message as being made very, very coherent and very impactful if we start to put it in those terms. Another way of thinking about time is our 24 hours, and again, you know, when we're thinking about a digital channel particularly, is understanding how we can respond to our audience's habits and how we can know about them. So we can start to see, you know, we can start to ask questions about what's the rhythm of our audience's days. You know, what do we know about the way that they're doing? Are they logging on and doing their work emails as soon as they get in? You know, is it 10 to 9 and they're logging on and finding out what's going on? Are they browsing through a magazine at coffee break and just sort of flicking through and looking at things on a top-line basis? When they're out and about, if we've got a community nurse who's out and about, is she using apps on her phone to help her with dressing changes, for example? Is she using the internet? Is she using Google on her tablet to be able to look up information that's relevant to a specific patient? Are our nurses sort of logging in and just having a catch up on what's going on Twitter? Are they taking part in Twitter forums in their downtime? And then thinking about when they get home from work, potentially, are they then sort of switching into another mode and doing some CPD work on the laptop at home? All of these are useful to know because we can start to marry up the type of information that we want to get over in the right format, in the right tone of voice, and in the right context and on the right device if we understand what these habits are. So let's talk a little bit about the right device that's in there. Again, it used to be easy when it was magazine ads and detail aids, but the baseline for what we've got to provide these days is moving enormously quickly. It used to be printed materials, then it was everybody had to have a website, then it was, oh my God, we've got a website, but we've now got to have a patient website. Then it was our website's got to be optimized for mobile, then we've got to have a presence in the social space, and oh my God, now we've got to interact in the social space. It's all moving incredibly quickly. There's a huge amount of sort of pressure that's put on us to be able to sort of follow trends. And one of the dangers with this is we all go, great, let's have an app, let's have the latest thing. And we all rush in and we spend lots and lots of money and we create our app. Well, it's worth thinking because what we've got to think about really is that how, we should be led by the audience, not by the technology. It's about the audience's agenda and thinking about where we can add value. And is that value really going to be added by an app? We need to be thinking about how we can save them time. Do we need to entertain them? Do we need to save them money? Crucially, and quite profitably, how can we make it easier for them to do something that they need to do, particularly if that's something they don't like doing? And again, all of those questions can help to start to build bridges with your target audience, build engagement with your target audience, which is not necessarily technology-driven, although it could be using the technology as a platform. But it's just important to get those the right way around. Another thought, really, when we're thinking about devices is thinking about content with your channel. And again, it's sort of, perhaps a little bit obvious, but when you look and see what's around you, perhaps not always. So just a few examples. It may well be that, detailed CPD materials in print can maybe work with your website for more sort of featured video content, which can help sort of bring those materials up to life for you. When we know that people are out and about and doing product searches and demos, make sure they're optimized for mobile and tablet use, or that they're presented in an app, because that's where they're designed to be used in the field. Perhaps we can, there's an enormous amount of money that you spent on event symposia. Why not think about getting that content streamed as a webinar or something that people can revisit at a later date, so that you're continually providing added value content for your audience, and again, pop through in the right sort of channel, the right channel and the right device. So thinking about integration then, and pulling this together a little bit. A useful way of thinking about this is to think about your marketing strategy as not just about promoting your product. What we've equally got to think about is your marketing strategy has got to promote further opportunities to engage with your brand. So all of the time our call to action is going to be, how are we going to get people to come back to us? We know that the control is in their hands. How can we get them to want to come and engage with us, to use their time to actually engage with us as a brand? We've got to think about delivering the right message to the right person at the right time on the right device, as we've seen. And I think a lot of this is about pointing them to new content that might be of interest to them next time and the time after that. It's about cross-promoting your communications channel. And I think all in all, it's the thought of really thinking about taking them on a continuing journey. Unfortunately for us, it means that our job is never done. We never get to the end of a project because it's always sort of tipping over into the next stages. But ultimately, that's the way that we've got to think about it. It's an ongoing journey, and we've got to engage people for the lifetime of the relationship that we want us to have with our brand. So what I want to do now is just have a quick look at one of our clients and thinking about the ways in which we've incorporated some of these thoughts and ideas for a client of ours, Crawford Healthcare. Crawford Healthcare are active in the area of wound care dressings, and it's an area where a lot of the advertising, a lot of the marketing materials talk about differences in clinical efficacy, lots and lots of chart-heavy materials, as I'm sure you've all seen. But there was this article in Wounds UK in 2011 that was saying, studies cited that actually there's little difference in clinical efficacy between the products examined, which may indicate that clinicians choose dressings for other reasons. Well, for us as marketeers, that's actually really, really good news, because that reason has to be the brand. So where did we start with Crawford then? We started by thinking about our target audience. We started by thinking about our nurses, because this was a wound care dressing that we were thinking about for community nurses, predominantly for use on highly exudating wounds such as leg ulcers. But in actual fact, the research that we did indicated that people are not actually that interested hugely in the 0.05% differences in efficacy between products. The sorts of stuff they talk about is the human encounters that they have. It's part and parcel of what makes them go to work in the morning, the encounters they have with patients, with colleagues, and these encounters are important not just in sort of making her feel good, but in terms of shaping her actions and her decisions right the way through. start point then for us in terms of thinking about our Crawford's product was a product called Keramax, which is a super absorbent dressing that these nurses were using. And it had been around for a little while. It was sort of mid-market in terms of what it was doing, but wasn't particularly performing, wasn't really making too much of a mark amongst the market leaders. What we did with the insights that we got through from our nurse research groups was we rebranded Keramax and we called the new product Keramax Care. So what we wanted to try and do was reflect the real heart of what makes nurses get up in the morning was the fact that it is all about care. So immediately it gave a whole new feel and a whole new look and a whole new touch point for this brand to directly connect with its target audience. And this is something that then went through onto our packaging. When you open up a cupboard in the average leg ulcer clinic or district nurse's bag, a lot of the packets are going to be pure white with black writing on them. Keramax Care range was coloured in this very, very soft blue, very designed to it's still talking about efficacy. It's still giving the right amount of information, but it's much more soft. That softness, of course, didn't necessarily extend to everything. We've got this whole brand look, but it still had to be all about delivering the right materials. But as we were saying before, it's that right message at the right time. So where we were looking at things like detail aid, where you need detail of exactly what does this product come in, what's its indications, where can you use it, where can't you use it. Of course, all that information needs to be presented, but it's presenting it in the right channel at the right time. When we came through to our advertising then, what we did was we took quite a different approach. We took the idea of Keramax Care and we talked about patient stories. So what we did with this was we actually went through and spoke to a number of nurses and just asked them to tell us stories about their day, tell us stories about patients that have been memorable. We weren't asking them particularly about Keramax, we were just asking them about their experiences. And we utilised these stories as part and parcel of the press ad as a way of engaging with these nurses. So rather than an ad that talked about efficacy up front, it talked about the patient, which, as we know, is something that the nurses wanted to engage with. There was a link that went through from the press ads back through to the website, so you could listen to more of June's story and others on Keramax Care. So when people came through onto the website, there was June. We had her on video. She's very, very obviously a real nurse. We weren't using actors. We weren't using any tricks or treats and things. And we were able to get some stories through from that were really engaging for our nurses and audiences to listen to. This then extended, and we actually created the Keramax Care Nurse of the Year and used the idea of stories, so encouraged other nurses to come through with their stories to be able to enter Nurse of the Year, or they could nominate colleagues. So again, we were promoting this through the press advertising, but directing people back through to the website to listen to the absorbing stories and also to enter the competition. And again, we had the donation to charity for the winner. What we found with that, just before we finish off, was that we managed to actually get Keramax Care from its sort of mid-range, lower mid-range position to being #1 in terms of market share in just over 18 months. So this isn't just an exercise in branding. It has actually got that pragmatic sense of, it's got to deliver. And of course, everything that we do has got to deliver. So there is a sense in doing this. But hopefully what that's done is given you a little bit of insight into how we can not just have a multi-channel marketing strategy, but a multi-channel marketing strategy that really integrates across those channels, across those devices, across those audiences. As always, we've been working hard with lots of our existing clients on these sorts of issues, and if there is anything that you'd like to talk to us about or to discuss anything that we've spoken about this afternoon, then please do contact me. It's Julie Neilson, and you'll find our website at foundryhealthcare.co.uk. Thank you.